So I'm a data designer based in Paris, but as many of us in the field, I definitely did not study data visualization. And in 2007, when I had to choose what I was going to study, so my first bachelor's degree, I didn't even know such thing existed. I think at the time, it probably wasn't even a thing. So I studied business and economics and then later finance for my master's. And my first serious job that was related to my studies was at Warner Brothers as a financial analyst. And at that company, the role of the financial analyst was a little bit different than the way we see it in banks, financial institutions, or even in corporate finance normally. It was sort of a mix of data analytics, so on the financial side, but also on all sorts of sales and stocks and development of the company. So I was creating data visualizations from the very beginning, but they looked more or less like that. So this is even a prettier version, I would say. We would create them in Excel because I didn't know that there was a better way of doing it. I didn't know that there were best practices for data visualization design, that that researchers were looking at visual perception and how we look at things. And the word design was definitely not part of my vocabulary. But then a few years into my career as a financial analyst, I got a little bored and started studying data analytics. So that's when I went and learned programming. So I started with Python. And as you may already know, there are quite some libraries with Python that do data visualization. And that's where I discovered this whole new world of visual analytics, of how things can look good while being informative at the same time. And since then, things have sort of unraveled. I became really passionate about data visualization really, really quickly. It's been only a couple of years, and today I literally live and breathe data visualization almost every single day. I'd say 95% of my days. And this is more or less, or at least a few examples of what I create today. So this is hours of training and iteration and learning. So when I started creating data visualizations that are worth the name data visualization, I realized that one of the things I struggled the most with was the design process, because I spent so many hours just getting stuck on the little details. Like I would start my data design process and go right into choosing the good color palette, which is definitely not the first decision you should make. And then I would realize at some point, painfully, that I couldn't even use those colors because they didn't fit my data, and that I had to change the data type altogether. Last spring, I was contacted by a team of researchers, a team of professors at Ashton University, and they asked me if I would contribute to a book they were putting together on challenges and developments in data visualization. So each chapter is written by a different author, and it will be available sometime next year. I don't have a date yet, but it will be open source, so everyone will have access to it. So what I did for that book, the book chapter that I wrote, was on the design process, and that's what we're going to look at today. So this is a visualization that sums up what I created for the book. I removed the legend here, but we'll look at this visual again later. The length of the bars is basically the estimated amount of time in percentage values inside the entire data design process. So let's say working in a software is 45%, finding the focus is 20%. So we're going to go through all of these steps together today. But in order to do that, we need examples, right? And in the book chapter that I wrote, I did the same thing. I created a visualization, which was this one, to be able to illustrate each step for our readers. So I'll use this example once again today to illustrate the theory or the suggestions that I make. And then I'll also provide you with a data set that you can play with and do it and follow along with me. But before we dive deep into all of this, I think it's important to know that I'm not pretending to know this perfect solution to the data design process, or that this is the only way of doing things. What we're going to look at today is a process that works for me, that I built in the past couple of years. It also includes, I would say maybe half of it is tips and best practices that we hear a lot about from data visualization designers, from accomplished data visualization designers around the world. And so it's sort of a tried and true approach for at least half or more of it. But what's important to note here is that the decision-making process, that the design process will definitely depend on you as a person, as a designer, on your personal style, on the tools that you use, and it will also depend on each project that you're doing. So use what I'm saying today, use it or look at it as suggestions that later on you can adapt to your own way of working. Okay, let's dive right deep into the data. I feel a little strange because I cannot see any one of you, so it just feels like I'm talking to myself this whole time. So feel free to send me things in the chat, notes, reactions, emojis, whatever you feel like. Okay. The data set I used in this example that you just saw is a data set from Information is Beautiful. I don't know if you've heard about them. It's a company or an organization, I would say, by David McCandless. And this is a list of data visualization books, as the title says, that everyone should read. And they put it together in collaboration with the Data Visualization Society that I hope you're all members of. So this is a list that provides us with the best books in the field, the authors or the titles, the category or the type as they call it, the release date, the purchase link, the code of the book, etc. The basic information for the books. And Information is Beautiful always makes their data sets available for to download on their website, which is really cool. So this is what I used, just so you know, and we'll get a little bit more into detail in a second. So I'll use this to explain the different steps in the design process. And for you today, you can either use this one. So let me introduce this briefly. There's a link at the top. You can start downloading right away. So it's a Datafest workshop at bit.ly. And this is a data set of the different types of coffee and tea and the calories that they represent. It's a very simple one. It's a quite fun one. It's also from Information is Beautiful. They made a visualization about it in 2009. So when you go to the file, you'll see that there are two tabs. So the first one is this table you see on the left. And the second one is the one you see on the right, the second tab that is optional in case you want to play around with it. So the first one, as I said, gives you the calories, and the one on the right is the equivalence of activities or other things you can eat or do based on the number of calories. So if you eat something, or if you drink a coffee that is 500 calories, it's the same thing as if you were eating a pizza slice. So I'll let you go and download this or make a copy of it or write it down or whatever you feel like doing. I'll take a look at the chat to see some activity in there. Okay, thanks, Neil. Let's just take a minute to prepare the data set and have it at hand. It's also totally fine if you want to work with a different data set. So either you have one in mind. Yes, I can surely share the link here. You can either take one that you've always wanted to explore, or maybe you have one that you've, here you go for the link, or maybe you have one that you've always wanted to explore, that you've already explored, sorry, but you feel like you could maybe find a different angle to it. So you can just go ahead and use that one. Or if you just feel like following along without doing too much work today because the conference is a fun day of holiday for you, go ahead as well. So feel free to take screenshots and notes of everything that's coming up. Okay, let's go then. So as we saw in the steps in the chart that summarizes the design process, the very first one is called Explore. So this is a place where you look at what you should do with this data. And after we're done with it, you should be able to pick at least a couple of insights that you're going to visualize in the step after. But we're not going to start by diving into the data right away, because there's something really important we have to do before that. And that is think about our audience. Unless you're doing a personal project that is only for yourself and you're not going to show it to everyone, that could totally be an option. Otherwise, you need to pause and think for a few minutes about who your audience is, what they know, and why they're here. So not to get lost in this whole thing of what should I know about my audience and what questions should I answer, let's look at a structured approach. I think these 4 questions are enough to start with. And we're going to look at them in more detail. So who are they? What do they care about? What do they know about the topic? And also, very importantly, what do they know about charts and graphs, and how comfortable are they with them? Okay, so who are they is a little bit of a personal question. So it will definitely depend on the project you're working on. So it may be your colleagues, and you know the answers to all of these questions, so their age, occupation, education level, where they live, what they studied, where they are right now, where they will be when they look at your visualization, that kind of thing. Other times you may need to make assumptions on that, which is okay, as long as you pause for a few seconds to think about it and write down as much information as you can gather. Question number 2 is, what do they care about? So why are they looking at your work in the first place? What are they interested in? What are their aspirations, be it personal or professional? What could motivate them when looking at your visualization? And maybe you even know what kind of challenges they face. It could be one of the reasons why they're looking at your visualization. Questions number 3 and 4 are probably a little bit easier to answer. So how familiar they are with the topic. It could be that they know everything about it and you're just presenting a new angle to a topic that is totally commonly known. Or maybe it's totally new to them, but probably in most cases it will be somewhere in between. So it's not a yes and no answer. It's probably more like a spectrum that you will place your audience on. And finally, how comfortable are they with charts and graphs? So are they used to reading the basic chart types? And if the answer is yes, then can you go a little bit more crazy in a good way and visualize something a little bit more complex for them? So before you try and do this yourself, let's look at how I described it in this example that we're looking at today. So since I created a visualization for a book, it's a little bit difficult to know who exactly the people will be, the people reading the book will be. So these are a few assumptions that I made while creating it. So I was thinking they will probably be professionals who already work with data at least a little bit, and they want to learn about data visualization, either to go deeper into their knowledge, to go to the advanced level, or to maybe even get the basics. And they probably live in middle and high income countries, given that it's a book by a university published by researchers in CRC Press, and that they most likely have degrees of higher education. What do they care about? Making effective data visualizations, learning from the best authors in the field. That's why they choose the list. That's why they look at the list of the books. And maybe some of them think that one day they could also write a book, doing the research in the meantime. So this also brought me to say that they probably know at least a little bit about data visualization and have maybe even read a few books on the topic, or perhaps even a lot. Finally, how comfortable are they with charts and graphs? Oh, I can see that I forgot to change the section. Doesn't matter. I was going to say that they're probably used to reading at least the simplest types of charts, so lines and bars and maybe even a scatter plot, and could probably read a more complex visualization if they were given a legend or a how to read section. So this is maybe a lot of information, maybe not. Let's come back to this section and take a couple of minutes to write down the answers for the data set you have at hand. So either the one I provided you or one you want to look at. Let's say that your audience for today, let's make it simple, and say that your audience are the people in this workshop. So probably from different parts of the world, and they know at least a little bit about data visualization. So if you do, you can start right away. I'm just going to add a couple of things. If you do this in a real life project, you probably want to write the answers down somewhere. And this is not the only place where we'll be writing stuff down. And then keep it next to you just in case during your iteration process later on, you want to come back to it and be like, okay, so what was the answer to this question again? It can be really handy. So all I'm trying to say is that once you write it down, just don't throw it away 5 minutes later. Just keep it next to you until you're done with the project. Okay, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to do that. Go ahead. Of course, if you have any questions or comments or want to share what you're writing down, or usually do it a different way, or whatever comes to your mind, you can always use the chat. Okay, so I managed to change some settings with the video. So now I see myself and not you guys. For some reason, the buttons are just all black. And I can see someone from the Datafest. Hi, yay, I'm not by myself anymore. Cool. Okay, so I guess I don't see anyone else because they just don't have their cameras on. Perfect. Okay, let's move on. So now you have a profile of your audience. And one other note here is that you may want to do it the way people who do user research do it, as in create personas. So you may want to say, there are 3 different types of people that are going to look at my visualization. So one of them are complete newbies, one of them are maybe data visualization professionals, and the third section may be researchers or something like that. So you're not obligated to sort of put everyone in the same bucket, but you can split them into personas or sections or however you want to call them. So once you do that, you can move on to the data itself. So this is one of the messiest parts. If you've ever, can I move on? Yeah, okay. If you've ever heard about Judeikyte and people who wrote about data exploration around his time, he called it sort of the messiest step or detective work, as in you're just given lots of data points and you're supposed to find insights in it. And this is definitely one of the messiest steps that I like to structure with the 5 W's that are more or less borrowed from journalism. So the what, the who, the when, the where, and the why. I'm of course going to explain each and every one of them, but if you feel like already starting to answer the questions while I'm talking for the data set you have at hand, please feel free. The reason I say that, because I look at the time and I can see that it's flying by and we still have so many things to look at. So feel free to just write stuff down while you follow along. So the what is the objects, the phenomena, the events, maybe the actions that you're suggesting someone to take, or the human implications in your data set. Maybe I'm going to give you my example right away. So I'm just going to go back and forth in between this slide and this one. So the what in the data set that I use for the book is really simple. It's just best books on data visualization you can read. Second question, the who, is all of the people involved. So the people who are affected perhaps by the data, the readers of the visualization, the authors of the visualization, and the people who gathered the data and made it available for you. In my case, it was the authors of the books, of course, the past and the future readers, and the teams at Information is Beautiful and Data Visualization Society who put the data set together. The when is probably the easiest one of them all. So when was the data collected, and how did it change over time? In this case, the data set, or at least I assume that the data set was collected quite recently, like a year ago, maybe last year or a year and a half ago. The first book in the data set that was suggested for everyone to be read was published in 1880, but the most of them were released in the past 20 years. So this is the time. These are the timelines in the data set that I had, and the where is not only where things happen. So in this case, this is sort of all over the world, because the list of available books we're looking at is a global worldwide list. But the where is also about where was the data available, because it can matter in some cases, and also what was the sample size. So in my case, you already know that the data was available on Information is Beautiful website, and that it's a curated sample of the best data visualization books. So the last W, the why, is really subjective depending on your project. So why did something happen? Why was the data collected? Maybe why we're looking at this to begin with. In my case, the why is to provide readers with the best literature on data visualization they can find. Okay, I know this is a little bit, quite a lot of information. I want to add one small note before you move on to playing around with this. And that is that this is the EDA section, so the exploratory data analysis, which means that you are going to create visualizations while exploring the data. But it doesn't mean that you're looking to make anything pretty, anything you're going to show to the audience that they need to understand. These are the examples of visualizations I made when I did the exploratory analysis of this data set. You can see that there's zero design in them. They definitely don't look good. There's no color, there's no anything. The fonts are not the prettiest fonts in the world, to say the least. However, the only thing you're looking for here is to find information that you can use later. Okay, so I'm going back to the 5 W's and see if you can answer at least a couple of those for the data set you have at hand. Once again, I'm just going to add a couple of sentences while you start working. So one thing is that this will really depend on your data set. Sometimes you have something very simple and you maybe just want to answer the what and the who. Sometimes the why will be very important if you're visualizing something for social good or for COVID or other difficult, important topics for society. So really, as every other step, just adapt it to the data set at hand and to the project that you're working on. Okay, so I'm gonna set the timer for, let's say, 5 minutes. In the meantime, you can chat with us, ask questions, share things you find, whatever you feel like. We haven't spoken about the tools yet, but in this section of exploratory analysis, the EDA, you can just do it in Excel where the data lives, or even on paper, since we have a very simple data set. Wherever you wanted, the pictures I showed you of this one were made in Tableau just because it was easier and quicker to do so, even though my final visualization was made completely in a completely different tool. So just for this EDA part, what's important is to use the tool that you feel most comfortable with. Maybe it's Excel, maybe it's R or Python, whatever you prefer. I really like a quote from Nathan Yao that you may know. He's used to be a mathematician, statistician, I believe, and now he's a data visualization expert, more or less. And he runs a website called Flowing Data. And he said that R for him is his thinking language. So whenever he does exploratory data analysis, he would use R because that's how his brain works when he looks at data. To me, that's either Python or Tableau for the exploratory phase, and for you, it may be something completely different. So it's maybe also something we can discuss later, or you can share in the chat. So another 2 minutes before we move on. Thanks for your comment. We still have a couple of seconds and I have a question from Leo, so I'm going to respond to that before we move on. So the question is, in a normal project, how much time do you use for each stage? So the answer is, it will really depend. Like if I'm doing a very quick project at work where I know that I just need to show sales or something really simple, then this process is just going to be really, really fast. If I'm working on something that's very custom and needs lots of iteration, like the project that I'm telling you about today, then this is uh, the proportional size of each step. Maybe the find the focus could be longer than 20% if the data set is very big and messy. In my case, it wasn't. So that's how I put it as 20. And the biggest part, at least for me, is working in the software, because I really like to get every single detail right. So I would just move around and iterate a lot, refine the details very for a long time, especially after I ask for feedback, but we'll go back to it in a second. Okay, so we are more or less done with the 5 W's. And the reason why we look at them is that afterwards we want to create a 1-sentence summary of what we want to show. So I call the summary the headline in this design process, so that we stay in the journalism kind of vocabulary. So following from the 5 W's. So what the headline is, it's a sentence, and I insist on the 1-sentence length, so 50 to 20 words max, that summarizes what your visualization is about, what you're trying to achieve. And it's meant to help you connect all the dots in your work. So every piece, every element in the visualization that you create, be it the title, the subtitle, the chart, or the 500 charts that you need to create, they should support the headline that you wrote down. So since we were working on the 5 W's, the goal here is, of course, to use at least a couple of them. So here are a couple of examples that I wrote for the visualization that I'm talking about today. And the one I picked was the last one that says that 7 authors stand out from the entire list. And the reason I didn't pick the number 1 and number 2 is because they're a little bit too narrow, in my opinion. And the last one was more, they touched upon more authors and put their work in the spotlight. So of course, what I'm going to ask you to do is to take just 1 minute and try to write a headline. So for today, it may be something fun that has to do with coffee or with another data set that you're working on, or something serious, whatever you feel like. So go back to your 5 W's, pick a few of them and see if you can write a headline out of them. Okay, so the minute is nearly up. If we were in person, or if we had more time, we would definitely spend a few more minutes discussing all of this. And we have to move on for the sake of time. And I also know that some of you want to attend different sessions that are happening simultaneously. So let's move on. So once you're done with the headline, hopefully you have maybe a few visualizations, or you have them in mind. Since I've given you a simple data set that maybe you don't even need the exploratory analysis and you already know what you want to show. And now we're going into the second section, the second stage of the data design process, where we're going to arrange and style our elements. In case you're already getting very excited, we're not going to start by diving right into the data visualization tool and creating visuals and titles and annotations that you want to create. The first thing we're going to do is talk about inspiration. So this is the step one in projects that you want to be a little bit unique, projects that should answer a specific question that was raised for you and that you don't know the answer to right away. So once again, this wouldn't apply in a work environment where you're asked to create a line chart for the last 10 weeks of sales, but for other projects, this can be very useful. So this is my short list of websites that I use to look for inspiration. And one of the main reasons to do that is to see what is out there, what can be done. I think there's a famous quote that I'm going to paraphrase because I don't know it by heart, but the quote that says that each artistic piece is never an original idea. It's a sort of a mashup, a mix of many things that happened before. And I don't think that data visualization is an exception. I think it works the same way. That's why I like to look at examples from other people and what they make. Someone says it's Austin Kleon. I definitely read it in his book. But I'm not sure the quote comes from him. Anyway, so these are a few websites that you can visit. So Dribbble is the screenshot that you see at the top. It's more of a modern website and dashboard design kind of website. The second one is Behance, that it's the second screenshot, and it's a little bit more focused on graphic design, but we can definitely find data visualization examples in there as well. Then there's Pinterest, that you probably all know for perhaps different reasons. I know that I started using Pinterest to look at recipes and food pictures, and then I ended up using it for data visualization. And what's really cool with Pinterest is that you can save them, arrange them group them into boards and share them with people, and that you can save pictures from anywhere around the internet in your Pinterest page. And then finally, for those who use Tableau, there's a huge gallery of Tableau public visualizations, and it's getting better and better by the day. I think it started as something very simple, and now people create lots of custom things that are really cool. Okay, this is where to look. And someone asked me if I can share the slides in the Slack. I can certainly do that later today, or you can feel free and take screenshots. We're not going to go through the examples for the sake of time, but these are a couple of people or a couple of design desks in data journalism world that I look at regularly, if not almost every day, or at least once per week. And I think you should know about it. If you don't know some of them, you should definitely bookmark their websites and look at them. So the example at the top is Nadie Bramer. For those who know her, you probably recognize the style. And the second screenshot is Graphic Detail by The Economist, where they post a chart per day. It's more of the statistical chart style, but it's still very interesting and always quite elegant. Once I look for inspiration for a specific project, then the idea is to create a mood board. And there are definitely at least a few schools of thought on mood boards. Some people some designers rather, like to put things like colors and pictures and words that evoke the emotion they're looking to create with their work. And they don't like putting the visualizations itself in the mood board at all. I like doing that because personally, most of the time, when I look for inspiration, it's either for the layout, as you can see in the screenshot here, or for different encodings people use. So if I like in the radial bar chart that I showed you at the beginning, there are bars, but there are also little dots that encode something else, and we'll come back to it. So I look at how different people different designers encode several data points that are of different category together, especially in a format that is a little bit unusual, as you can see the radial chart. So it's totally up to you. It's also totally up to you if you show this mood board to anyone. Some designers show them to their clients to show what they're going to get at and sort of get validation from them. And I personally most of the time create them just for myself. Okay, so we're not going to go through all of the websites. I'll share the links and the slides and the everything. We're going to move on to the next step that you're going to hopefully enjoy, which is sketching. So what is sketching? Sketching can be done either on a piece of paper with a pen or a pencil, or in your favorite software where you do prototyping, where you do wireframing. I personally really like sketching on paper. It's a personal preference because I think it just brings me back to my childhood when I would sit with my coloring book and try to fit into the lines. And maybe that's also the reason why I like data visualization, who knows. So I really like doing it on paper. I also find it more or less therapeutic. I would go not in the scientific terms, but for me personally, drawing on paper really helps. Like sometimes I can be in a work meeting that's a little bit stressful. I would just take my notebook and draw some charts and stuff for a project that I'm working on. It really helps me calm down. And many data visualization designers sketch. I'm sure this is not the first time you're hearing about it. And most of them say that sketching helps put the ideas on paper, but without getting too attached to them. Because once we create something very custom on the computer, it's really hard to get rid of it later on. It also helps you remain minimalistic. So when you create a visualization on your computer, every mouse click, it doesn't cost you too much. You can just click all over the place and add different elements into your visualization. But when you're drawing by hand, then each stroke costs a little bit of energy. So if you when you do it on paper, then you're more likely going to think twice before adding another set of grid lines or too many labels. Okay, so these are the sketches I made for the visualization that I showed you. This is the time where you get out your pieces. You get out your pieces of paper and try to do the same. As usual, I'm just gonna add a couple of sentences, a few notes while you do so. These are more or less the final sketches, the nice versions of them where I already added color and stuff, because I needed to put a picture of it in a book, so I couldn't show the most horrible sketches that I make just for myself. But just so you're reassured, if you're one of those people who think that you cannot draw and it just looks awful, you're not the only one. I think you're at least 1 out of 2 designers say the same thing. It's definitely the case for me. When I try to sketch maps, they look like pancakes, more or less. Thankfully, in this project, there were no maps. What really helps me, and once again, while I keep talking, feel free to draw. What really helps me is having a designer kind of notebook. So the example you see here is a kind of pink. It doesn't really show, but it's much more pink than that actually. So I have a sketchbook that is divided in probably 5 sections. I'm looking at it right now because I have it at my desk. So there are a few pages that are aligned, a few that have the boxes in it, a few that are dotted. Some of them are totally empty and white. Some of them are totally empty and pink. And then depending on the project, I will pick the page I want to draw on, or sometimes on a few, and then just see what happens. So just take another minute or 2 to sketch and see what happens. See that Leo in the comments says that he used Observable for inspiration too. Definitely. I started using it recently as well because I'm learning JavaScript and D3. So that's where I would go for inspiration if I'm up for the challenge of creating a chart with D3. But we can add this to the list. All right. So hopefully you have some sketches. Don't worry, we're not going to ask you to show them to anyone. And another note on the fear of sketching, because we sometimes are afraid of making something that doesn't look good. There's a designer, can't remember her name. I promise I'll find it for you guys before I send the slides. Catherine M something, but I don't want to make a mistake. But what I really like about her process is that she says, when she asks people to sketch the first draft of anything, she calls it the shitty first draft party. And I really like this name for it, because it means just everyone just make whatever comes to your mind. We're not looking to make it pretty. That's not the goal here. No one's going to judge you on it. So the shitty first draft party. Okay, so after you've sketched, you are ready to dive into the software and create the stuff you want to show to your audience, the stuff that is going to support your headline, answer the message, get a message across. Get the message across. I'm just gonna pick up on a question from Leo from the chat. He's asking if the sketch should show real data and must be real data. Yes, preferably it would be based on the data set that you're working on. But it's once again, it's a sketch, so it's more or less rough in the sense that you're not going to draw the exact line. This is not what we're looking for, but what you will need is at least the shape, to visualize the shape of the data. So if you have a peak in a line chart or a bar that is much higher than others, that's what you're looking for, because your goal is to see on paper before moving on into a software, how your idea, this idea that you have in your head, will look like. So if you're working in an abstract form or not with a data set at hand, it's not going to be very helpful. But when I just sketch randomly for therapy, as we mentioned earlier, I just invent the data. The data doesn't exist. So this is something that could help you train for sketching. And another quick tip: if you feel uncomfortable drawing and sketching, the Dear Data book from Georgia Lupi and Stephanie Pozavec is a really cool tool. So I'm just writing into the chat and moving on. So this is the stage where you create the different elements that you're going to need. For today, since we're short on time, let's just create maybe a chart or two, whatever you had in mind, and a title, a subtitle, a data source, or a date, the name of the designer, which is yourself, if you want to add it. What I'm going to ask you to do, though, is to stick to it in black and white. As you can see in the screen, the famous quote from the designers, to get it right in black and white first before you do anything else. So if you can, please stick to that. And I am going to set the timer to, let's say, 5 minutes again, so that you can create the different elements that you're going to need. If you're up for it, I would be curious to hear. I'd be curious to hear what kind of tool you're using. Okay, so there's one question in the chat that says, what if we plan to use color to map at a dimension of our data? That's going to come in like 5 minutes. We're definitely going to to do that, but you don't need to do it right away for the reason that I mentioned it in the very beginning, which is that if you start by choosing color and adding color, you may just get lost in it before it's time to do so. And for another reason that I'll mention just in the beginning. Okay, so I see Adobe Illustrator, raw graphs, and Tableau One Love in the chat. Okay, quite some diversity. Sketch, cool. Okay, Figma and RStudio. All right. I've never heard of this mix before. I'm curious to see more about it later. Tableau, okay, 2 for Tableau. Oh, Power BI, cool. Looker, okay. Didn't know you could use Looker for a data set that is not plugged in. That's really cool. D3JS, Tableau, and R. Awesome. All right, so another, how many minutes do we have left? 2.5. Yes, we have quite some Tableau and R enthusiasts. Someone is saying that Flourish is also really great too. I agree. They have recently added quite some customizations in their tool, which make it much more fun to visualize, and Data Wrapper I really like as well. And their team is really awesome. If you follow Lisa, Charlotte Frost, and everyone else, they create very good work. Another minute for your visualizations and your titles and other elements you want to create. Try to resist the temptation to add lots of color, and we'll do it together just in 1 second. Tamar mentioned Datafest catalog in the chat. I agree, it's a great tool to when you want to choose the type of charts you want to use for a project. This is something we didn't really touch upon today because I'm working with the hypothesis that this is not the first time you're creating a data visualization, because we're talking about the process that we're trying to structure. But if you're rather new, or if you create something that is custom and a little bit complex, you may want to use one of these tools that help you choose from the list of visualizations, from the tens of visualizations that exist out there in the world for your project. Google Data Studio is also cool. I like it. I started recently using it at work. It's pretty fun. Okay, so let's say you have all of your elements created. Before we jump into color highlighting and all sorts of fun presentations, there's another topic I want to introduce to you, which is still in the part of the process where we're being black and white. So it's called a layout grid or a typographic grid. I'm pretty sure it's borrowed from the graphic design domain, which is a cousin domain of data visualization. feel free to tell me in the chat if you ever use layout grids. I know that some of the designers here who come from graphic design definitely do. I'm sure you do. But me as a data visualization designer, I think I learned about the existence of the grid only a few months ago, maybe beginning of the year. And I was like, oh, I think everyone should be taught that. So now when I teach data visualization, I'm like, okay, so there's this concept called the layout grid, use it. The problem with it is that I find it a little bit difficult to explain in a setting where we have a few minutes for each step. So I'm just going to show you how it looks like in 1 second, show you how it looks like, and it will really depend on the software that you use, what you can do with it. So a layout grid is something that will help you align and place elements on your canvas. So be a canvas if you're in D3, your screen, or a paper if you're a journalist and creating a visualization for print. Another note before we actually go in and do that is that the layout grid will help you place the elements of the page, but you should also always keep in mind the way we, at least in the Western world, the way we read what we see on our screen. So sometimes there's a term called the Z pattern that we use to show that when a reader comes to your visualization, they will start at the top left of the page. And that's why it's often called the most precious real estate in your visualization. This is where you most often see the title of the visualization, the subtitle, all the necessary explanations that help the reader understand what will go on. So it's not the case 100% of the time, but very often, and it is the case for this reason. And then the reader would go in the Z pattern, going to the right, and then zigzagging depending on the size of your visualization. Just keep that in mind. And this is how a very simple layout grid looks like. And there's some suggestions on the books you should read on grid systems in the chat if you want to take a look later. So this is a very simple 12-column grid that I created in Figma. And I really like using Figma or any other design tool for that. This is its simplest form when I have margins and the gutters, which is the space in between two columns. So if I use this kind of grid, the only thing you need to keep in mind for today is that your elements should be aligned at the start of the column, so to the left, and then however big along they are, whatever they fall, where they end, so whether it's in the middle or completely aligned with a column, that's okay. If you have a bit of a more complex project, you can also add rows. So here's the layout grid that I use for the visualization we're talking about today. This is, as you can see, not the final version, and we'll come back to it later. So there's much more color than what I showed you earlier. But you can see how I placed the elements according to the columns and the rows in the layout grid. Once again, I find it quite difficult to explain. Maybe we would need an entire session on that. What you need to know for today is that it exists and that you should use it and that your elements should be aligned. So we can talk about it more on Slack, or you can Twitter, Instagram me, whatever. And you read the book Grid Systems in Graphic Design, apparently, because people really like it. The one I really like, I'll find you the name, it's right behind me. It's on, it's called the Workshop in Grid Design something. That is also really, really cool. So if the tool that you're using allows you to do that, just take a minute to create a layout grid for your design. If you have no idea what this is and you want to learn later, that's totally fine. We'll just take a few seconds for those who are used to it. A quick note on it, I believe that Power BI only has a default option for it. So the what is called the modular grid, just the little squares all over the screen. Tableau recently added an option to customize it, to make those squares, the modular grid, as big or as small as you want. There's a question in the chat. So do you use golden ratio principle in visualization? Would you mind expanding on what you mean? Because I think depending on the field, the golden ratio can mean many, many things. So just let me know. Golden spiral. Okay, I don't know what that is. Feel free to let us know what the definition of that is. Okay, so either you created grid or you just decided how to place elements on the screen to align them to the left or the middle or the right, whatever you want to play with today. And now we come to the question of color. So I asked you to try and stick to black and white first, so that you make a conscious decision of, do I need color later on? The most important question here is there anything that should be highlighted? Maybe you have an outlier in the data and you want to make it bigger or colorful so that your audience's attention is drawn directly to it. Maybe one category that you want to highlight, maybe a country, maybe a type of coffee that you're looking at today. Take a few seconds to think about it, but don't take it as a default that I necessarily need color. So maybe it's not going to be all black and white. Maybe, let's say you create a bar chart and it's a shade of gray, or it's a shade of dark blue, or maybe just one blue. But if you're not highlighting consciously one category or one data point, then you don't need to have color all over the place, at least most of the time. Of course, it's always your choice, your designer's choice. But I really like to keep this to the end of the process, or at least the second part of the process, so that I don't start highlighting stuff that doesn't need highlighting just for the sake of using color. So I'm hoping you're making this decision right now. I'm just going to add a couple of more notes. This is something I have to fight a lot with in the business world, and if some of you work in companies, or even with some clients, it can be a hard battle. When I first started doing data visualization that is worthy of its name, and trying to share the best practices with my colleagues, one of the first responses that I got was that if there's no color, then it just looks boring. And I had to tell people that you're not here to entertain, you're here to communicate information. So of course we use color if there's a purpose for it, if it should be used. But if there isn't any, then you shouldn't just use color by default. Okay, so you looked at your visualizations, the titles, and the everything. So maybe you need color to highlight some stuff. For me, I say color, but of course, color is not the only highlighter that you can use. It can be typography, it can be the boldness, the size of elements that you can play around with. So maybe you need to highlight something, or maybe you leave it as is for this project for today. I want to stop here for a second and note that even though we're looking at a design project that looks so structured and so organized and everything's very smooth, in real life it definitely doesn't work like that. At least not for me. Maybe for you it does, and then I want to participate in your workshop so that I know how you manage things. This is a visualization from Austin Kleon's book that someone mentioned in the chat earlier. It's called Steal Like an Artist. It's a really tiny book that I really recommend. And this is a visualization that pretty much sums up the design process, or at least the way I feel when I create a visualization. So at the beginning, I would have this really nice idea and sketch it on paper, and it will look great. It will be, oh, this is going to be awesome. I'm just going to need a few hours and then create best work of my life. And then I sketch it. So I'm like, okay, it looks good. And the first draft that I usually create with my computer, with the software that I use for the project, looks horrible. And then I'm like, oh no, what am I doing? Why did I start creating this in the first place? What am I supposed to do? So Austin Kleon called it the dark night of the soul. And I can definitely relate. Feel free to let us know in the chat if you can relate to. And then at the end, you iterate, and you end up, or I iterate and I end up creating something that I don't hate. and end up in this little data point that Austin calls it. It's done and it sucks, but it's not as bad as I thought. So I thought it was important to note that it's not going to be smooth. It's going to take lots of iteration. So this is the kitchen, the backstage, or whatever you want to call it, of the visualization I showed you at the beginning. And these are only a few screenshots. I wrote a blog post on my website for that, and I think I had at least 60 different screenshots to show the iterations that I needed to arrive at a design that I didn't hate. And I think in total, it took me a month, so an entire month last summer, of thinking and trying and playing around with different things that I wanted to explore before I got into something similar to what you see on the top right. The quote that you see here at the top is, "A good design is as little design as possible." I really like it. It's of course not my quote, but I really like it. It throws us back a little bit to a point where I ask you as to, do you think that there's something that should be highlighted in what you're doing? And maybe it shouldn't, because design is not, as I said, not meant to entertain, or it could entertain, of course, but if you're communicating information, maybe it's not your goal to entertain. Then you don't need to add different design elements that will hinder the reader from understanding the message, from understanding that information. And that being said, a very important question that I think we should always ask ourselves when we think we're more or less done with the project is there anything else I could remove? So not, is there anything else I could add for another annotation of the color, another piece of text? I think most of the time we need to make sure we have removed everything there is to remove. And there's another quote I really like by Antoine Saint-Exupéry, who said that perfection is achieved not when there's nothing left to add, but when there's nothing left to remove. And I really like that one. So take a look at the visualization you've just created, just a few seconds, and see if there's anything you can remove. Maybe it's in your copywriting. So maybe it's your title or subtitle. You can remove a few words in there that are unnecessary and that take the reader's time. Maybe it's color, maybe it's even an entire graph that is redundant. That can sometimes happen as well. Just a second to think about it. Okay, we are ready to move on to step 3. I call it deliver, for the reason that this is maybe the first time you're showing what's going on to people. So it's not going to be the case every time. Maybe you've already shown the mood board or the sketch to a client, but this is hopefully the first time you're showing a finished, a more or less polished version of your visual to someone from your target audience, to a client or someone else. Okay, so there are 2 things in here that we're going to look at. So number 1 is asking for feedback. So either you're going to already show this first half-polished draft to a client, or just a friend, a partner, a colleague, or someone who will be honest with you and tell you what works and what doesn't. And here are some questions that may help you ask for feedback. Asking for feedback can be very very personal and a little bit intimidating, because sometimes we feel like we're being criticized rather than our work. And it's important that we keep this constructive. Here are a few questions, and this is the point of the workshop where you may want to share with us something you've created. So this is also the question for the Datafest team who are hosting us today. Maybe if we have volunteers, we want to give the stage to some of them who want to show what they've been working on, or today or some other times, that we can practice asking these questions. So let me know, if you let us know if you would like to share anything. Maybe it's just a picture in the chat. Maybe you want to, if the hosts allow, maybe you want to take over the screen and show us, whatever you feel like. So just let us know while I keep talking. So the feedback session is meant to gather as much information as you can. In design, more generally, it's sometimes called user research. So this is what we could call the feedback sessions for visualization as well, just to see what the reader understands from what you made. It doesn't mean that your work is bad or that it's great. It's just meant to get into the users, into the readers' minds, and see if they see it the same way you do. You know, like when you prepare a speech or a presentation or an essay, and sometimes you're like, oh, this makes so much sense. And then you rehearse it in front of people and they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. So with data visualization, it can be the same thing. It can work the same way. If you feel this is really clear, most of the time, not because you're doing something wrong, but because you've spent so much time looking at the data and going through different iterations. It's the data just becomes like second skin to you, and you don't realize that other people don't have the same amount of information you do. So for now, I don't see any volunteers who would like to share their work. This is fine. You can also do it on Slack later if you feel this is unfinished, or you want to do it in a more private manner. You can also send me messages and stuff. Another note on asking for feedback is that you should pick people who are going to be honest with you. It's not people who are going to be ruthless, but at least they're going to tell you the truth. For me, it's the first person to do so. It's always my boyfriend. He never sugarcoats it or wraps it in any nice words. He would just tell me like this. I don't like this. Change that, and I really appreciate it. So he's the number one person who looks at all of my designs and kindly does so. So maybe you have a partner, someone you feel comfortable with. Maybe it's a colleague. Maybe it's already a client if you have a good relationship. And you want to have their feedback before moving on to the next step of the project. All right, so you've gathered your feedback, and now, of course, the next step is to iterate based on that feedback. In the visualizations I showed you earlier, rather in the iterations, I wasn't really happy with the colors of the bubbles that I had in the middle. So I asked members of the Data Visualization Society. I mentioned it earlier. If you haven't heard about the society, look it up. There's a Slack workspace for Data Visualization Society members, and there are also a few channels that are meant to showcase work or to ask for feedback. So that's where I posted mine, and a few people kindly gave me their feedback, saying that they didn't really like the color, that it didn't add any value to my visualization. So this is what I was trying to work out. So this is literally a screenshot from my Figma workspace. Those of you who work in Figma, you can notice the frame names and the layouts on the screen. So I was trying the different iterations of the color and the shadows and the radials in the middle of my visualization, where I showed the backgrounds of each author of a data visualization book. What really helps me when I iterate and I'm not sure where I'm going to land is to try out every idea that pops in mind. Sometimes it can feel silly. or you're really unsure if it's going to work, but you don't need to show it to everyone. So just try it out. If it looks horrific, you just delete it afterwards. But maybe somewhere in those ideas that sound or feel silly at first, there will be something that that is groundbreaking. There's a hidden gem somewhere that you could really build on. Another two quick tips for iterations are to place the different ideas you have next to each other. As you can see in the screen, I was trying a few different colors. The ones at the top don't look great. By the bottom, it starts looking a little bit better. But the reason I'm able to make this decision is because I put them next to each other and can compare, look at them and be, okay, this one really works. This one doesn't look that great. So I'd rather explore the option at the bottom left. And if you're unsure of which road to take, which way to go, you can always go to one of the first steps that we discussed, and that is looking for more inspiration. So maybe this time it's something very specific for the layout or for the color, so you probably have a better idea of what you're looking for than at the very beginning. Okay, so once you've made all of your iterations, you are ready to publish. So publish is a big word. It will really depend on your project. If there's some sort of official publication there, it may just mean that you share it on social media. If it's a personal project, maybe you send the dashboard to a client or post it on your company's or organization's website if you're a data journalist and you make public work. This was my final visualization that I showed you at the beginning. As I was saying, depending on your project, you may continue the design process after this. So you may still gather feedback if someone tells you, oh, I don't understand it. Maybe it's an online tool and you can gather information on the users, on how many of them connected, how many of them stayed on the page, where they clicked, where they got lost, that kind of thing. So you may continue iterating based on that information for a while. Maybe you'll need to update the visualization in a month, in a year, in 2 years. I think it's often said that the design process doesn't stop when you first create something. I know that when I do data analytics at the startup that I work for, often we'll come up with a sort of final solution, and then a few days later, the teams would come back to me and say, we thought that we would use your work this way, but we ended up using it a little bit differently. So could we tweak the visualization so that it adapts to our needs better? Just keep that in mind. Or maybe you just publish it. It's a static version. You print it in a magazine, and then you can go celebrate. Okay. So this was the summary of the process that I had in mind. I hope you will maybe polish what you created a little bit and share it with us on Slack or just in a private message so that I can see. I've been talking a lot. If you have any questions in the chat while I'm wrapping up, please ask them or later in Slack. These are the two pictures that you see on the screen are two books that I recommend if you're interested in diving a little bit deeper into the design process and the different decisions you need to make. I know that when I first started, I read a lot of data visualization books, but not a lot of them helped me find my way through the design process. And these are two that I read really recently. The handbook on the left by the researchers at Aalto University in Finland. I'm still reading it, but I really like the two of them. They're a little bit academic kind of research style, but they can really help you if you're unsure of what kind of process you would like to follow and what decisions you want to make in what order. And you can also download what we were looking at today. So this is a vertical version of the process visuals that I showed you at the beginning because I created these ones for the book. So you can download them on my website in the resources section. So you either you have the summary visual on the left that just reminds you of the steps, and on the right it's a long form textual summary of everything we spoke about. So it reminds you of the 5 W's, the headline, the tips for iteration, and the questions you may want to ask when you're looking for feedback. Okay, so this is all from me. If you have any questions, I feel like some people are still typing in the chat. Someone is saying that they have just discovered a new book. This is really cool. And I think Rosanna is trying to type a question. So hello to you as well. I'll just stick around for a while in case you want to ask me anything, share anything with the participants. Just let us know.
Hey, Evelina. I think we should encourage people as well to unmute themselves if they have a question. They can just hop in with their camera. Feel free to chip in.
Do they have the rights to do so? Do you need to make them co-host or anything, or should it just be a default option?
No, I think they can, because I just unmuted myself on another. I have 2 laptops. So yeah, people can do that.
Yeah, I think they should be able to do so.
All right.
While we wait, I think I have one comment that I was really curious to see what you think about. So the examples that you put from Information is Beautiful are a great example, not just as the publishing sort of routine that they have, but also the fact that they do 2 things. You mentioned that they post the sources often, and they actually post a link to the data sets, so you can explore their raw data or their cleaned data, but really in a form of just a sheet. And I don't know if they still do it, but often they also allowed comments on their data visualization pages.
Oh.
So often what happened is that, of course they're moderated, but often what happens is that like scientists or experts of the field will comment and say, I think that's a really great way to visualize it, but have you considered such and such? And often they would do like an edit version, still publicly saying this is version 2 after those public comments. So it created a very positive and constructive routine of having this collaborative effort where hundreds of experts from all over the world would help make analysts to improve their database.
That sounds really cool. It was probably a couple of years ago already. I think they published most of their visualizations when they were researching for the book. And some of them, like the example I used for today's session, I believe it's from 2009, so it's been a while. Today, they're not, to my knowledge, they're not creating many visualization except for the beautiful news project that has just ended. So I've never seen any of those comments, but they do sound really cool. So 2 things come to mind. One is that they're masters of accepting feedback, because it can be really hard to accept it, especially publicly, when someone just tells you, okay, you may be wrong, you may have done your entire project wrong. So that's really cool. And another thing is that especially if you're a data journalist, but even if you're working on a personal project for your company, it's a topic that is really complicated, that it's scientific. Like this year, we all saw so many visualizations on COVID-19. Before you publish your work, or even while you do the exploratory analysis, rather, you may want to consult those scientists and researchers and see experts on the matter. Depending on the context, you may want to see if they agree, if you understood the data correctly, and then iterate according to that, and then publish it. So if you have the luxury of doing so, and I'm pretty sure that a lot of researchers are open to discussion if you like email them or message them, especially the ones that have Twitter or LinkedIn accounts, they would definitely help you out. Okay, so I have a question from Rosanna. She's asking if I, like her, come back and forth from your data set to your visualization, deciding what to include or not include in your data viz, also considering if it's readable. I would say yes. I'm not sure I go back to the data that often. It will depend. If I have a really complex data set, I may want to go back and forth and do a few rounds of those 5 Ws that we spoke about. If it's a kind of a simple one, then I will look at the data once for a really long time and then iterate in my tool, in the DataVis tool. So it will really depend, but I think it's normal for most DataVis designers to just go back and forth. Someone said it recently, one of the designers in the data visualization community, that when he creates long form visualizations or a dashboard kind of work, it's not that he creates stuff that he needs to do, like the way we looked at it today, a bit of an ideal version, and then puts everything together and it just clicks and it works and it looks great. It's more like you create the different elements, then you put them together, then you're like, nah, no, this one doesn't work that well. Then we go back to the stages before that and tweak them a little bit, and then go to the final layout and see how they fit in again. So I would definitely agree that we probably all iterate a lot, and that's what makes our work fun, I think, because there's never one answer. We can just iterate and try different versions and choose the one that we like the most.